Imagine standing in front of a supermarket shelf late on a Tuesday night. You're looking at 2 jars of peanut butter. One is the brand you truly love, the one that smells like your childhood. The other is a generic jar, exactly $1 cheaper. You stand there frozen for 3 minutes as if paralyzed. That $1 difference looms like a mountain in your eyes. It feels like a choice between a brief moment of happiness and a week of security. If this feels familiar, it's not because you're bad at managing money. Your brain is currently operating in a very specific, ancient survival mode. It's like a layer of fog overshadowing everything. However, there is a very specific threshold where this fog begins to lift. It's that point where you stop looking at the price of the peanut butter and start looking directly at the shelf. Most people think you need millions of dollars or fancy titles for this, but the truth is much more elegant and intriguing. It is a mindset shift that reflects the greatest struggles in human history. For most of human history, we were all standing in front of that supermarket shelf. What we call the economy wasn't even a real economy. It was a zero-sum game played in the shadows. If someone took a larger slice of the pie, it meant someone else went hungry. There was no growth, only the exchange of crumbs. Emperors claimed their power came from the stars. Everyone else dug into the earth just to survive one more day. Progress moved at the speed of a glacier. The idea that an ordinary person could change their life with an idea or trade was considered not just unlikely, but a form of madness. You were born into a prison and destined to stay there. Then the world caught fire in a way no one expected. In the late 18th century, something shifted. Humanity finally seemed to find the leverage to move that massive boulder that had been stuck for ages. We call it the Industrial Revolution, but for those living through it, it was a chaotic explosion of coal, iron, and even raw ambition. Suddenly, those called the chosen few didn't just consist of kings. Anyone with a little capital and plenty of courage got into the game. Machines took over the work of thousands of muscles. Meadows were replaced by great factories. Wealth seemed to be created out of nothing. But this new speed had a terrible price that we are still paying today. As smoke filled the cities, a massive chasm opened between people. Some became wealthier than ancient emperors, while others worked 16-hour shifts in damp basements. Children traded their limbs for a few pennies in weaving looms. It was a world of incredible abundance and nauseating cruelty. The rawest, loudest form of capitalism was born. It was within this mess of grease and gold that a different idea began to be whispered. Names like Karl Marx looked at the blood on the factory floors and decided this machine was completely broken. They imagined a world where workers owned the tools, profits were shared, and no one had to wait in fear at a supermarket shelf over a single dollar. This was the birth of the Great Debate. It wasn't just about math or ledgers, it was a war over the human soul. On one side was the promise of limitless freedom and the grand chaos of the market. On the other, the promise of absolute equality and the order of the state. On paper, both were perfect, but both would eventually stumble upon the realities of human nature. Think about your own life for a second. Imagine that heavy boulder you're trying to push up a hill. When you have no savings on the side, every step is a war against gravity. You sweat, you tire, and you constantly check if you've moved even an inch. This is the personal version of a nation trying to build itself from scratch. In the financial world, there is a very real gravity that keeps people in place. When living paycheck to paycheck, your brain physically loses the ability to think about the future. You are in a survival loop. Because you don't have the luxury of waiting, you accept bad jobs. Because you can't pay the exit fee, you stay in toxic environments. You are a prisoner of the moment. But there is a magic number, not millions of dollars. About $20,000. If you are at zero, this might sound like a massive number. If you have much more, it might seem small. But psychologically and mathematically, this is exactly where the boulder reaches the edge of the hill. The threshold where the rules of the game truly change for you. Before reaching this number, you work for money. Every dollar is a direct result of your sweat and time spent. But once you cross this line, something invisible starts to happen. That $20,000 starts doing its own work. It earns a few dollars while you sleep. For the first time, you feel the wind pushing your back instead of hitting your face. In the 20th century, this is exactly what happened to nations. Countries were trying to figure out which operating system would get them past that survival threshold the fastest. As the dust of World War I slowly settled, the Soviet Union tried to force equality through a massive central plan. They turned the entire country into one giant factory managed by bureaucrats. They thought if they removed greed from the market, everything would be fair. They set the price of bread and the boots that kept our feet warm from an office in Moscow. They told everyone where and how to work. On paper, this was very elegant. In reality, it was a disaster full of missing parts and long queues. Without a market to tell them what people needed, They produced too much of the useless and too little of the important. Meanwhile, the capitalist world was having its own heart attack. In 1929, the stock market didn't just crash, it practically evaporated. The Great Depression showed that unregulated, wild capitalism was like a car with a massive engine but no brakes. It could create incredible wealth, but it could also drive the entire global economy off a cliff in a single afternoon. By the 1930s, the world was looking at two broken promises. One system promised equality, but brought breadlines. The other promised prosperity, but also brought breadlines. It was a stalemate of misery. But then something strange happened. Both sides began looking at the other over the fence. They realized that purity was the enemy of survival. After World War II, the most successful countries stopped trying to be perfect and started being practical. They understood that for a society to innovate, it needed the incentive of the market. But at the same time, it needed the safety net of the state so people wouldn't fall into the abyss. They began to build what we call the mixed economy today. Think of this like your own financial journey. If you become too capitalist in your own life, you might take every risk and grind yourself down until you crash. If you become too socialist, you might stay in the safety zone until your soul withers and never take a risk. The secret to a good life and a good country lies in the mix of the Ewo. Look at the places people point to as success stories today. They call Scandinavia socialist, but that isn't entirely true. They have some of the freest markets and most successful companies in the world. However, they use the profits of this capitalism to fund a massive safety net. They blended the incentive of one system with the security of the other. On one side is the United States, the absolute engine of innovation. It creates things the world didn't even know it needed, but it also struggles with a massive chasm between those at the top and those at the bottom, and the melting of the middle class. It has an engine, but sometimes the brakes feel like they are made of plastic or cardboard. And then comes China, the biggest plot twist of the story. They call themselves a socialist market economy. This is a fancy way of saying an authoritarian structure managing a country that loves making money more than anything. It's a strange and uncomfortable hybrid system that has lifted millions out of poverty, but at a very high cost of control. The lesson here is this: every major economy today is actually a messy and complex mix. The pure forms of these ideologies died a long time ago. They just forgot to tell those writing the textbooks. We are all living in a trial and error laboratory. We are looking for that delicate balance between the freedom to win and the security of not losing. This brings us back to you and your special threshold. Why is $20,000 so important? Because it gives you that thing both capitalism and socialism promise but mostly fail to deliver: a real and tangible right to choose. When you have this buffer, you are no longer a slave to the next 2 weeks. You have the power to walk away from the table. If your boss is a nightmare, you can leave. If an opportunity arises in another city, you can take it. If a friend has a great business idea, you can actually consider it. You move from defense to offense. Your brain stops scanning for threats and starts scanning for possibilities. You're no longer that person paralyzed by the price of peanut butter. Most people never reach this point because they get caught in the status trap. They spend their first increases in income on things that make them look like they've reached the top of the hill rather than actually reaching it. They buy a new car with high monthly payments. This is like putting extra weight on the boulder while you're still climbing. A new car is a glamorous thing. In reality, it is the biggest symbol of success that prevents you from actually succeeding. The moment you drive it out of the dealership, a massive chunk of your labor turns into air and evaporates. You're trading your future freedom for a specific smell and a shiny piece of metal. You choose to stay in the survival fog a little longer. Consider the cost of a car over 40 years. Between payments, insurance, and repairs, the average person actually spends the money that would have allowed them to retire 10 years earlier. If you can resist this urge, keep driving the old car and focus more on pushing the boulder, you'll reach the summit faster than you think. Once you clear the hill, the momentum is breathtaking. The second 20,000 comes faster than the first. Third, even faster. Eventually, your money starts working harder than you. This is the compound interest people talk about, but it's also psychological interest. As your options increase, so does your self-confidence. Today, we are moving toward a century that doesn't care about old labels. Artificial intelligence, the changing climate, and the world's massive debt bubbles will test every system we have. These challenges don't care whether you define yourself as a capitalist or a socialist. They only look at whether you can adapt. They care about whether you are resilient. The countries that thrive in the next 50 years will be those that can combine individual creativity with group stability. And the people who succeed will be those who understand that wealth is not about having too many things, but about having too many options. I'm talking about moving from a state of fear to a state of will. That great debate debate between capitalism and socialism was never about which one was right. It was about power. It was about who would hold the levers of society. In a pure capitalist world, power lies with whoever has the most capital. In a pure socialist world, it lies with whoever has the most political connections. In both cases, the person at the very bottom is mostly ignored. But when you lay your own foundation, when you cross those invisible thresholds in your own life, you take back a small piece of that power. You step out of that zero-sum game. You build your own hybrid system. You build a life that has both the driving force of a market and the security of a fortress. The next time you find yourself in front of that supermarket shelf or at the edge of a heavy financial decision, remember that you are part of a very old story. You're pushing a boulder that billions of people pushed before you. The slope may be steep and the air thin, but the view from the top changes everything. Never let the noise of experts or the shouting of politicians distract you from the simple mechanics of that climb. Focus on the momentum. Focus on the threshold. Once you get that boulder to the top of the hill, gravity will finally start working with you, not against you. That is when the real story of your life will begin. If looking at the world and the history in our pockets this way makes sense to you, then you are in the right place. History always has an answer if you know how to ask the right questions. I am here to help you find the actual signal beyond the noise. If you want to listen to me again, don't forget to subscribe below and leave a like. Stay curious, keep pushing. I'll see you at the next turn of the road.